Good morning and good evening, church. Today I want to talk to you about something that is both simple and supernatural, something that every one of us desperately needs, yet none of us can earn. I'm talking about grace, but not just any grace. I'm talking about grace that moves mountains. Let's begin with this. If you have faith as small as a mustard seed, you can say to this mountain, move from here to there, and it will move. Nothing will be impossible for you. Matthew 17:20. Now listen carefully. Grace is what makes that kind of faith possible. You can't move a mountain on your own. You can't fix your past. You can't heal your heart. And you can't climb out of every valley in your strength. But grace, God's unmerited, unstoppable, ever-reaching favor can. One, grace meets you where you are. Some of you walked in here today with a mountain in your life. A mountain of debt, a mountain of depression, a mountain of guilt, a mountain of broken relationships, and you've been trying to chip away at it with your own tools, logic, effort, maybe even religion. But grace says, you don't have to climb this mountain alone. I will meet you at the base, and I'll carry you over it. Romans 5:20 says, but where sin increased, grace increased all the more. You see, grace doesn't avoid your mess. It walks right into it. It doesn't wait for you to clean up. It moves in while the dust is still in the air. That's the power of grace. Two, grace transforms, not just forgives. A lot of people think grace is just about a second chance, but grace doesn't just forgive you, it transforms you. Titus 2:11-12 says, for the grace of God has appeared that offers salvation to all people. It teaches us to say no to ungodliness. Grace teaches, grace strengthens, grace reshapes. When grace takes hold of a person, they don't just get up. They grow up. Some of you are stuck because you've accepted grace for your past, but you haven't embraced it for your purpose. You believe God forgave you, but you're not walking in the authority He gave you. That mountain in front of you doesn't need more self-help. It needs a soul. Surrender to grace. Three, grace is God's power in your weakness. Let's be honest. We all have weaknesses, but grace doesn't ignore your weakness. It flows through it. Paul said in 2 Corinthians 12:9, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. That means your mountain might be the very place God plans to reveal His power. Maybe God hasn't moved it yet because He's using it to move you. Maybe He's building your character while you're begging Him to change your circumstances. But grace isn't in a hurry. It's intentional. Grace works in silence. Grace works in suffering. Grace works in seasons. And when grace is finished, you won't just get over that mountain. You'll stand on it. 4, grace is meant to flow through you. Grace was never meant to stop with you. When grace moves your mountain, it sets you up to help move someone else's. We are called to be conduits of grace, not containers. People around you are hurting, doubting, and searching. And they don't need your perfection. They need your story. Your testimony becomes someone else's map. Galatians 6:2 says, carry each other's burdens, and in this way you will fulfill the law of Christ. In other words, grace received becomes grace released. And what's the mountain in front of you? Is it fear? Is it shame? Is it something no one else sees but God? Here's the good news. God doesn't need you to have mountain-sized faith. He just needs you to trust His mountain-moving grace. His grace is enough. It's greater than your sin, stronger than your struggle, and deeper than your doubt. So today I challenge you. Stop striving and start surrendering. Stop carrying and start casting. Stop climbing alone and let grace lift you. Because when grace shows up, mountains don't stand a chance. Grace enters your life exactly where you are, in the middle of your struggles, pain, and imperfections. It doesn't wait for you to clean up your act, nor does it demand that you become a better version of yourself before it shows up. Grace is the unearned, unmerited favor of God that meets you right in the midst of your brokenness. Too often we think we have to fix ourselves before God will accept us, or we believe that our mess is too great for God to handle. But the truth is, grace is most evident when we are at our lowest. Think about the way Jesus interacted with people during His time on earth. He didn't avoid the outcasts, the sinners, or the brokenhearted. Instead, He went to them. He dined with tax collectors. He healed lepers. He spoke to the Samaritan woman at the well when no one else would even look at her. Grace isn't concerned with your reputation or your past mistakes. It isn't afraid of the mess in your life. In fact, grace rushes toward your mess, ready to make something beautiful out of it. Grace doesn't stand at a distance waiting for you to come to it. It comes to you regardless of where you are or what you've done. There is no prerequisite for grace. It's not something you earn or deserve. In fact, that's the very nature of grace. It's a gift that you cannot work for, nor can you repay. It's given freely, not because of your good deeds, but because of God's deep love for you. This is the amazing thing about grace. It meets you exactly where you are without asking for anything in return. You don't need to clean yourself up or make yourself worthy of it. Grace doesn't look at your failures and say, you have to do better before I'll help you. Instead, grace says, I'm here for you right now, just as you are. This is a radical truth that often confuses our human understanding of relationships. In the world, relationships are often based on a system of give and take, on expectations, conditions, and proving yourself worthy of love or help. But grace flips that narrative completely. God's grace doesn't ask for anything in exchange. It simply offers unconditional love. When you realize that grace meets you exactly where you are, it changes everything. It removes the pressure of having to be perfect. It removes the burden of needing to perform to earn God's love and favor. Instead, grace invites you into a relationship based on trust, not on your ability to meet expectations. The Apostle Paul speaks of this unmerited favor in 2 Corinthians 12:9, when he shares how God responded to his request for relief from a thorn in his flesh. Paul wanted to be rid of his struggle, but God's response was not to remove the thorn. Instead, God said, grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. God's grace wasn't limited to Paul's strength. It was made evident in his weakness. Grace meets us in our weakness when we feel inadequate, unworthy, or overwhelmed. It's in these moments that grace is at its most powerful, because it shows us that God is not waiting for us to have it all together. He's right there with us, working in our weakness, ready to give us the strength we don't have on our own. Grace doesn't just meet us when we are in crisis. It's not limited to the difficult seasons of life. Grace is present in every moment, whether we're struggling or thriving or thriving. It's in the quiet moments when we feel at peace. And it's in the chaotic moments when we feel like we can't take another step. Grace is with us at the beginning of our journey and stays with us through every twist and turn along the way. It doesn't just meet us at our lowest. It sustains us throughout our lives. When you understand that grace meets you exactly where you are, it opens the door to healing, restoration, and transformation. You don't have to pretend to be someone you're not, and you don't have to carry the weight of your past alone. Grace takes your brokenness and turns it into something beautiful, something purposeful. It gives you the courage to move forward, not because you are strong enough, but because grace is strong enough. Grace doesn't see your mess and walk away. It enters your mess and begins to work in you and through you. And it is through this grace that you find the strength to rise above your circumstances and the confidence to move forward in faith. Grace transforms your life in ways that nothing else can. It's not just a one-time forgiveness. It's a continuous daily work that reshapes your heart, your actions, and your thoughts. When we think of grace, we often think of forgiveness, and rightfully so. It's through grace that we are forgiven of our sins and we are made right with God. But grace doesn't stop at forgiveness. It begins there. Grace isn't just about wiping the slate clean. It's about filling your life with new purpose, new strength, and new hope. When grace enters your life, it doesn't simply leave you the way it found you. It doesn't leave you stuck in old patterns of behavior, in old ways of thinking, or in old cycles of defeat. Grace works to change you from the inside out. It begins to root out the things that hold you back, the lies you've believed, and the habits that have kept you bound. It's like a gardener who doesn't just remove the weeds in the soil, but also enriches the ground with nutrients so that new life can grow. That's what grace does in your life. It doesn't just forgive you for what you've done wrong. It equips you to live differently, to think differently, and to love differently. The Apostle Paul understood this radical transformation brought about by grace. In 2 Corinthians 5:17, he writes, "So therefore, if anyone is in Christ, the new creation has come. The old has gone, the new is here." Grace doesn't just make us forgiven, it makes us new. It gives us a fresh start, not because of anything we've done, but because of what God has done for us. It takes our broken, perfect lives and makes them into something beautiful and purposeful. And the more we experience God's grace, the more we begin to reflect His character, His love, and His goodness. But grace doesn't just work on the outside, it works on the inside too. It changes the way we see ourselves and the way we see others. It teaches us to let go of bitterness, resentment, and unforgiveness. It enables us to extend the same grace to others that God has extended to us. This is why grace is so powerful. It doesn't just forgive, it heals and restores. It transforms our relationships, our attitudes, and even our desires. Grace changes the way we approach life. It takes our failures and turns them into opportunities for growth. It takes our weaknesses and turns them into platforms for God's strength. And this transformation doesn't happen overnight. It's a journey. Sometimes it's a slow process. We don't always see immediate change, but we can trust that grace is at work even when we can't see it. Sometimes the work of grace is subtle. It's in the small moments where we choose to respond in love instead of anger. It's in the quiet moments where we choose to forgive instead of hold a grudge. It's in the times when we choose to trust God, even when we don't understand what's happening. Grace doesn't force transformation upon us. It invites us into a new way of living. It's a continual process of becoming more like Christ, of being shaped and molded into the image of the one who gives grace so freely. Grace doesn't just forgive our past mistakes, it prepares us for the future. It gives us the strength to face tomorrow with confidence, knowing that God's grace will be with us every step of the way. It teaches us to trust God's timing, to rely on His strength, and to move forward with faith, even when the path ahead is unclear. Grace enables us to walk in the purpose God has for our lives, knowing that we don't have to do it alone. With grace, we can face challenges with a heart full of hope, knowing that God is at work in every situation, transforming us and making us more like Him. When we embrace grace, we allow it to transform not just the things we do, but who we are. We stop trying to earn God's favor and start living in the freedom He has already given us. We stop striving for perfection and start living out of the fullness of grace. And in doing so, we become more like the people God created us to be. Grace isn't just about forgiveness, it's about becoming. It's about becoming. It's about allowing God to do a work in us that we could never do on our own. And as we are transformed by grace, we begin to live out the fullness of the life God has planned for us. Grace works in your life in ways that you can't always see, but it's always present, especially in your weakest moments. Too often we think that our weakness disqualifies us from God's love, grace, or power. We may feel that we're too broken, too imperfect, or too far gone for God to use us. But grace is never limited by your weaknesses. Rather, it's in your weaknesses that God's grace shines brightest. When you acknowledge that you don't have it all together, when you admit your inability to fix yourself, that's when grace steps in and shows you the power of God at work in your life. The Apostle Paul is a perfect example of this. In 2 Corinthians 12:7-9, he speaks about a thorn in the flesh that he begged God to remove. This thorn, this persistent weakness or problem, was something Paul struggled with deeply, but God's response wasn't to remove the thorn. Instead, he said, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness." What a powerful statement. God wasn't minimizing Paul's struggle or saying it didn't matter. He was showing Paul that his grace was enough to carry him through his difficulties, and that in his weakness, God's power could be displayed more clearly. It's often in our weakest moments that God's power becomes most evident. When we feel like we have nothing left to give, when we feel like we can't go on, that's when God steps in and shows us that His strength is greater than our limitations. Grace gives you the strength to endure even when you feel weak. It's like the support beams of a building. They may not be seen by the outside world, but they are the foundation that holds everything up. Grace works quietly, holding you up when you think you can't stand. It's in your weakest moments that you come to realize just how strong God is, and that His strength is made perfect when you surrender your weakness to Him. This is what it means to rely on God's grace. It's not about pretending to be strong or putting on a facade of having it all together. It's about acknowledging that on your own, you don't have what it takes, but God's grace is enough to carry you through. Grace doesn't demand that you be strong on your own. It simply asks that you trust in the strength of God to carry you. You don't have to pretend to be something you're not. In fact, grace only works when you admit your weakness. It's when you stop trying to handle everything yourself and start trusting in God's power that you experience the full sufficiency of His grace. Think about the times in your life when you felt completely overwhelmed, times when you thought you couldn't handle anymore. In those moments, God's grace is always there, working in you even when you can't see it. Sometimes grace doesn't instantly remove the struggle. It equips you to face it with peace, courage, and hope. You may not feel strong, but you can rest in the fact that God's grace is holding you. It's in those moments when you realize that you're not alone, that God's grace is working through you in ways you can't always understand. When you understand that grace is sufficient in your weakness, it changes the way you approach life's challenges. Instead of feeling defeated by your limitations, you begin to see them as an opportunity for God's power to be displayed. Your struggles are not signs of failure. They are opportunities for grace to work in and through you. When you acknowledge that God's grace is all you need, you stop trying to fight in your own strength. You allow God to fight your battles for you, trusting that He is stronger than anything you face. God's power is never more evident than when we are weak. We tend to want to hide our weaknesses, to mask them with self-sufficiency, but grace invites us to be honest about our limitations. It's through our weakness that God's strength is made visible. Grace works in the gaps of our lives, filling the spaces where we fall short and providing the strength to continue when we think we can't go on. It's when we stop relying on our own abilities and start relying on God's grace that we experience true power. So don't be afraid to embrace your weaknesses. Don't try to hide them or pretend they don't exist. Instead, allow God's grace to work through them. Trust that His strength is sufficient, that His grace is enough, and that His power will be made perfect in your weakness. When you rely on God's grace, you discover that His strength is greater than any weakness you face. Grace is the power you need to overcome, and it is more than enough to see you through every challenge. Grace is the key that unlocks the impossible. We often find ourselves facing challenges and obstacles that seem insurmountable. We look at the mountains in front of us, whether they're personal struggles, family issues, health battles, financial burdens, or even emotional wounds, and we wonder how we can possibly overcome them. But grace is what enables us to do what we cannot do on our own. Grace empowers us to face the impossible with confidence, knowing that God is with us and that His grace is more than enough to move the mountains that stand in our way. In Matthew 17:20, Jesus tells His disciples, if you have faith as small as a mustard seed, you can say to this mountain, move from here to there, and it will move. Nothing will be impossible for you. This is a radical statement, one that seems unbelievable at first. How could faith, even the smallest amount, have the power to move mountains? The key is understanding that it's not the size of your faith that matters, but the object of your faith, God. When you place your faith in God's grace, you are tapping into a power that is limitless, a power that can move mountains. Grace is not limited by the size of the obstacle. It doesn't matter how big the mountain is in your life. Whether it's a financial crisis, a health issue, or a relationship that seems beyond repair, what matters is the grace of God that moves through your faith. Grace is what turns the impossible impossible. It's what takes the mountain and makes it move, not because of your strength or effort, but because of the power of God at work within you. But grace doesn't just remove the mountain, it changes you as you face it. When you rely on God's grace, you don't just overcome the obstacle, you grow stronger in the process. Grace teaches you to trust in God's timing, to wait on His direction, and to keep moving forward even when the path is unclear. It gives you the strength to keep going even when the mountain in front of you seems immovable. Think about how mountains work in the natural world. Mountains don't just appear overnight. They are formed through long periods of time and pressure. In the same way, the challenges and obstacles in your life don't appear out of nowhere. They are formed through seasons of testing, trials, and growth. But grace is what gives you the endurance to keep going through these seasons. It strengthens your character, builds your faith, and equips you to stand firm even when the mountain seems insurmountable. Grace doesn't promise that the mountains in your life will disappear immediately. Sometimes God allows the mountain to remain, not to cause you harm, but to refine you. The grace that moves mountains isn't always about instant removal. It's about learning to trust God's provision, His timing, His ability to use the mountain for your good. It's through grace that you learn to climb the mountain with hope, knowing that God is with you every step of the way. And when the mountain does move, it will not only be a victory for you, but a testimony of God's grace at work in your life. There's a powerful truth in understanding that grace doesn't just help us move mountain. It transforms us through the journey. The journey itself shapes our character, deepens our faith, and builds our dependence on God. And when we look back, we realize that the grace that was with us all along has not only helped us overcome the mountain, it has made us stronger, wiser, and more faithful. Grace isn't just about achieving victory, it's about growing in relationship with God. As you face the mountains in your life, remember that grace is with you every step of the way. It's what enables you to move forward when everything else seems impossible. It's what allows you to persevere when the road is tough and the mountain is high. And it's what will ultimately bring you to the place where you can look back and say, that mountain was moved by grace. So, whatever mountain you're facing today, know that grace is the power that can move it. Whether it's removed in an instant or you're strengthened to climb it, God's grace is enough to help you overcome. Don't focus on the size of the mountain, but on the grace of God that is working in and through you. With grace, nothing is impossible. Grace is sufficient for every struggle you face, no matter how big or small. Life often presents us with trials and challenges that can feel overwhelming. Whether you're dealing with a personal loss, a health crisis, a broken relationship, or financial difficulties, it's easy to feel as though your problems are insurmountable. You may even question if you're strong enough to handle everything life throws your way. But God's grace is sufficient for every struggle you encounter. It doesn't just provide temporary relief. It provides the ongoing strength, peace, and resilience to endure, no matter what comes your way. In 2 Corinthians 12:9, Paul shares how God responded to his struggle with the thorn in his flesh. But the thorn in his flesh. He prayed repeatedly for God to remove the thorn, but God's answer was not to take it away. Instead, God said, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness." This verse is a powerful reminder that God's grace is enough, even when we face things that seem unbearable. Grace doesn't remove the struggle, but it gives us the strength to endure it. It gives us the courage to keep moving forward when we don't think we can take another step. This truth is often difficult to accept. We want God to remove our struggles, to make everything easier, to give us instant relief. But grace doesn't always come in the form of an immediate solution. Instead, it comes in the form of God's presence, His power, and His faithfulness. Grace helps us endure the struggles, grow through them, and ultimately come out stronger on the other side. It's through the struggles that we experience God's grace in its deepest form, because we come to rely on Him more fully and trust that He will carry us through. The sufficiency of grace means that God's grace is enough for whatever you're going through. You don't need to search for something else to fix your problems or make you feel better. Grace is what you need. Doesn't matter if the challenge is big or small. God's grace is always enough. It's the strength you need when you're weak, the peace you need when you're anxious, and the hope you need when you feel hopeless. Grace isn't about solving every problem instantly. It's about equipping you to face each day with faith and trust in God's provision. When you rely on God's grace, you are acknowledging that you don't have to go through your struggles alone. You are trusting that God is with you in every situation, giving you the strength to persevere. In the moments when you feel like giving up, grace is the force that keeps you going. It's the whisper in your heart reminding you that you are not alone, that God sees you, and that He is faithful to help you through. Grace is not a one-time thing. It's not just something that you experience when you first come to faith. It's something you rely on every day. Each morning you can wake up knowing that God's grace is there for you, no matter what challenges lie ahead. It's not a temporary fix, but a constant source of strength and peace. As you face each new day, you can trust that God's grace is enough for whatever you may encounter. There will be days when it feels like the struggle is too much to bear. There will be moments when you wonder if you can keep going. But in those moments, remember that God's grace is sufficient. It's more than enough to see you through. It's what carries you when you can't carry yourself. What gives you the courage to face the next step? And what enables you to stand firm when everything around you is shaking? The sufficiency of grace means that God has already provided everything you need to face life's challenges. You don't need to look elsewhere for the strength you need. Grace is all-encompassing. It meets you where you are, equips you for the journey, and sustains you through every trial. When you understand that grace is sufficient, you can stop striving and start resting in God's provision. You can trust that even in the toughest times, grace will be there, guiding you, strengthening you, and carrying you through to victory. So no matter what struggle you face today, remember that God's grace is sufficient. You don't have to face it alone. His grace will see you through, strengthen you, and equip you for whatever comes your way. With grace, there is no struggle too great, no mountain too high, and no burden too heavy. Grace is sufficient for every struggle you encounter. Grace is the foundation of all transformation in your life. Without it, change is not only difficult, but impossible. When we talk about transformation, we often think about personal growth, spiritual development, or overcoming obstacles. However, the root of true transformation lies in God's grace. Grace is the catalyst that initiates and sustains real lasting change in us. It's not through our own strength or efforts that we are transformed, but through God's unmerited favor that works in us and through us. The process of transformation through grace begins with our acknowledgement of our need for God. We come to realize that we cannot change on our own. We cannot fix ourselves. In our own strength, we fall short. Our best efforts and willpower may bring temporary change, but they will never produce the deep, lasting transformation that comes from grace. This is why grace is so powerful. It meets us in our weakness, in our inability, and works through us to bring about real change. God's grace is the only force that can take our brokenness and turn it into something beautiful. This is what the Apostle Paul was speaking about in Romans 12:2 when he wrote, "Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind." Transformation requires a renewal, a complete change in the way we think, act, and live. But this transformation isn't something that happens overnight, nor is it something we could accomplish through sheer effort. It's through God's grace that our minds are renewed and our hearts are changed. Grace is what helps us see the world through a new lens, through the lens of God's love, His truth, and His purpose for our lives. The power of grace and transformation lies in its ability to break the chains of our past and enable us to live in freedom. Many of us carry the weight of past mistakes, regrets, and wounds that hinder our ability to move forward. We may feel unworthy or incapable of change, believing that our past defines us. But grace erases the power of the past and opens up the possibility for a new future. When you receive God's grace, it doesn't matter what you've done or where you've been. Grace doesn't just forgive you. It liberates you from the hold of your past and gives you the freedom to become who God has called you to be. This transformative power of grace also helps overcome our old ways of thinking and behaving. The Apostle Paul talks about the old self being put off and the new self being put on, created in the likeness of God. This process doesn't happen by willpower or determination alone. It happens through the ongoing work of grace in our lives. Grace changes us from the inside out. It works on our hearts, shifting our desires, changing our priorities, and renewing our minds. As we experience grace more fully, we begin to reflect more of God's character, His patience, His kindness, His love, and His forgiveness. Transformation through grace is not about changing our behavior just for the sake of change. It's about becoming more like Christ and living in the fullness of the identity He has given us. Moreover, grace enables us to be patient with ourselves during the process of transformation. Change doesn't happen overnight, and there will be times when we stumble and fall. But grace doesn't condemn us when we fail. Instead, it picks us up, reminds us of God's love, and gives us the strength to keep moving forward. Grace empowers us to keep going, even when we feel discouraged or defeated. It's not a license to sin, but the strength to overcome sin and grow in holiness. As we lean into grace, we learn to depend on God's strength, not our own. And it is through this dependence that we are truly transformed. True transformation through grace also means that we don't have to strive to be perfect. God doesn't expect us to achieve perfection on our own. Grace allows us to embrace our imperfections and trust that God is still working in us. It teaches us to let go of the need to perform or impress others. Transformation isn't about outward appearances. It's about an inward change that flows from the heart. It's about becoming the person God created you to be, not by conforming to the world's standards, but by living according to His purposes and His will. As you grow in grace, you begin to understand that transformation isn't just a one-time event. It's an ongoing process. Every day, grace is at work in your life, continuing to shape you, refine you, and make you more like Christ. And as you experience this transformation, you begin to live out the fullness of God's purpose for your life. You no longer live for yourself, but for Him, empowered by His grace to impact the world around you. Transformation through grace is the journey of becoming who God has always intended for you to be, whole, healed, and fully alive in Him. Grace is the foundation of all transformation, and it's through grace that we are changed. It's not by our own power, but by God's grace that we are made new. Embrace that grace today and allow it to work in you, through you, and around you to bring about the transformation God desires for your life.